Philosophy is arguably the oldest discipline. It's certainly old. It's been around since the time of Plato, which is a lot longer than subjects like the physical sciences. Please, natural philosophy, psychology, sociology, and any of those fancy modern topics like English literature. But despite that, philosophy does have a bit of an image problem. If I was to ask you to tell me how science works, you could probably have a pretty fair stab at it. We form hypotheses, we test them, we see whether the hypotheses get shown to be wrong, and, well, we go from there. There is a fair bit I've glossed over in the middle. Grant applications, employing postdocs, failed experiments, frustratingly poor refereeing of journal articles, and so on. But I think we all do have a good idea of the basics. But what about philosophy? If I ask people to describe what I do as a philosopher, the responses will range from blank stares, some suggestions that I think a lot, and some cheeky soul asking me whether it involves asking other people whether they would like fries with their burger. None of this is to suggest that the wider public has done anything wrong, or that there's anything wrong with working in the service industry. My only point is that philosophers haven't necessarily done a great job of explaining our methods. So, enter the robots. There's a really nice recent 2025 paper by Gomez working out of Madrid, and the paper in question is titled "Should We Trust Social Robots? Trust Without Trustworthiness in Human-Robot Interaction." It's a little bit of a mouthful. But the paper covers quite a lot of ground, and one of the questions it asks is whether, given our concept of trustworthiness, it makes sense to think of social robots being trustworthy at all. So Gomez makes the case that for someone or something to be trustworthy, so deserving of our trust, they must be capable of being moral. They must be capable of intending to perform actions. Here's an extended quotation from the paper that I think is really helpful and clear, and it is talking quite explicitly about robots. They, the robots, cannot have a normative status that entails responsibilities or obligations towards their human truster, which in turn means they are not accountable for any harm they might cause. They cannot have an empathetic or emotional status which would make them capable of having good or ill will towards the truster, caring for their welfare, although they might be designed to calculate and maximise the well-being of their users. They cannot properly make commitments, let alone be committed to the users, even if they could behave as if they were by stating promises, for example. The lack of inner mental states precludes their capacity for trustworthiness. Therefore, after scrutinising the nature of current social robots, I agree with those authors who argue that they, the robots, cannot be trustworthy and should not be labelled trustworthy. Now, it's not my main focus in this video, but I would be fascinated to hear what people think in the comments. Do you think that actually this shows that robots aren't trustworthy or can't be trustworthy? Let me know in the comments. But what comes next in the paper is actually my main focus. Gomez, I think, correctly points out that there seem to be numerous cases where we do in fact trust social robots. As they note, there are cases where humans have married sex dolls, avatars or holograms, and they give a whole bunch of citations to cases where those have been reported. And, as Gomez notes, there are other documented cases where people appear to have fallen in love with artificial intelligences. As Gomez goes on to say, I claim this kind of sharing is impossible without some degree of trust. So, let's step back. Gomez has tried to show us that our concept of trust applies in cases involving people and social robots. But, says Gomez, the concept of trustworthiness doesn't apply. To remind you, they cannot have responsibilities or obligations. They cannot have an empathetic or emotional status. They cannot care for their owner. In short, they lack any of the features necessary for trustworthiness to apply. Cool. And so from there, Gomez uses these two different sorts of cases to argue for one of their key claims. What this shows is that we can have trust in the absence of trustworthiness. For, as we've just seen, the concept of trust applies in these cases involving artificial intelligences and robots. The concept of trustworthiness does not. Now that seems, to me at least, like quite a surprising and really interesting conclusion. And certainly on first inspection, we might think that we can only have trust where we have the possibility of trustworthiness. We might well not think that we can trust something that cannot be trustworthy. Now, this particular discussion and set of cases is obviously very much focused on some highly contemporary, vexed issues around the moral status of robots and some of the relationships that people have formed with them. Relationships that we might worry are not entirely healthy. Now, for my own part here, I want to set any such judgments to one side. What I'm interested in here is what we've done, what Gomez has done in the paper, the methods. So Gomez has used case studies, vignettes if you will, to get us to see how we deploy our concepts about the world. And they've compiled real-world examples to show us that our concepts, for instance, of trust or trustworthiness, do or do not apply to particular cases. And then from that, they've been able to derive that quite surprising conclusion that we can trust in the absence of trustworthiness. Now that they've done that here, we can see how that basic pattern of reasoning could be used, and indeed is used quite widely, and will inform a lot of what goes on in philosophy. So for instance, how should we understand the concept of knowledge? Well, again, let's think about lots of cases, lots of vignettes, examples, and then form a theory. Then we can test our theory against other vignettes. If our theory of knowledge succeeds, then in any vignette you care to think of, everyone should agree that either the concept of knowledge does or doesn't apply. If we have a bit of disagreement in these cases, then we might need to have a go at developing another theory. Things are really similar in the philosophy of trust and trustworthiness. And of course, what Gomez has done here, along with a number of other things, and the paper is rich and covers a lot of points, and I really recommend you go and read it, is give us some of those important vignettes that we can help use to frame our theory of trust and our theory of trustworthiness. And that's a really important part of philosophy. It isn't all there is to philosophy for sure, but it's fair to say that this approach to working out where concepts do and don't apply is a cornerstone of a lot of work that gets done in the contemporary philosophical tradition, and certainly in the philosophy of trust. So, do we trust social robots? Should we? Tough questions, and I love the fact that Gomez has written on this. For my own part, I think there are parts of the argument that I'm not quite persuaded by, but that's philosophy. Put two philosophers in a room and you'll get three different opinions. And I'll need to show if Gomez is wrong in a paper, and I'll let you all know if I can make my arguments work. But whatever you think about the specific conclusion, I think it's a really nice illustration of some of the ways in which philosophical reasoning can progress. So, I hope you've enjoyed that little diversion into philosophical methodology here on Trust Me, I'm a Philosopher. If you did enjoy the video, give it a like and subscribe to the channel, and then come back for more where we'll be looking at trust, what it is, and how to build it.